I believe we're live. Let's see what's happening. There you go, 4 seconds in. So I'm here with three very busy ladies here to talk about contractors risk management mastery. Um, let's start off with introductions. Let's start with Gloria. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, everybody. My name is Gloria. I am in New York State, and I own a boutique design build company that focuses predominantly on construction management of retail spaces, build outs in the fitness world, as well as restoration and historic preservation of old churches.
Wonderful. Historic preservation. I'm in demolition, so we're kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Sometimes my
Katie,
recommendation is to demo.
Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Katie Hayden. I'm from RHK Construction. We specialize in precast concrete and masonry restoration. So anything from the aesthetics on the inside and the outside to structural repairs, and anything from preventative and deferred maintenance for new and old construction. And then obviously when we have things where private clients need contracts where they're just trying to keep up on that preventative and deferred, we do that as well. And we're also big advocates for our industry. We love to talk about the trowel trades and getting the next generation encouraged to build. So that's just one of our community efforts that we love to put out there as well. So that's RHK.
Wonderful. And you serve, I'm sorry, what area do you serve again?
We serve the Kane and Kendall County area. We are definitely looking to extend it into other counties, as we continue to grow. So hopefully we could start hitting about 3 or 4 counties. That would be nice, maybe even 5, but we have to do that as we increase our team effort. So the more schools, the better, I say.
I love it. And we also have some good mornings from everybody. We have Tanya. We have Leah. Happy Taco Tuesday. Is it Tuesday or Wednesday?
It's Tuesday, isn't
It's
it?
Tuesday.
It's Tuesday,
Oh my
right?
goodness. I ate
Yeah,
tacos
it's Tuesday,
yesterday, so
Lance.
Taco Tuesday every day. And we have Monique. Hi, Monique. How are you doing? All right. And then we have Megan Shapiro here, attorney, but this is hashtag not legal advice today. She's sitting in her role as risk strategist. So, Megan, why don't you go ahead and tell us about some of your services and give some context as to this webinar?
Sure. So thank you. I'm Megan Shapiro. I'm a full-time practicing construction attorney, licensed and practicing in California. Specifically, my office is in Sacramento, but I can practice all over the state. I've been representing construction companies for almost 15 years. And over the last 6 months to a year or so, I realized that after representing these companies in litigation for so long, and having these relationships and being involved in the beginning stages of contract negotiations and the beginning stages of projects, that there were a lot of lessons that we could be learning from the litigation that we had been involved in and apply them on the front end. And so I sort of put my head down, distilled all of those lessons down, and created a proactive risk management strategy. And that's sort of now my side passion, my side hobby for now, what I talk about on LinkedIn all the time. And I am in the middle of launching, and by that I mean on April 30th, the doors will open to launch my first online proactive risk management course to teach construction leaders how they can increase profits through strategic proactive risk management. So that's what I'm doing.
Nice. And you also do like one-on-one coaching or in-person coaching as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't like to call it coaching just because I feel like a fraud using that word because I don't have any coaching certifications. It's just my experience doing it. So I'm calling it strategy sessions. But yes, I do one-on-one strategy sessions. And I also am offering the training that is the backbone of the online course. I'm offering that as an in-person training because I really think that to truly get the best application of those strategies, it requires sort of an in-person digging into your specific needs with your individual businesses. So I do that as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, everybody, if you have additional questions, go ahead and add them into the comments. Otherwise, I'll follow up with Megan in the DMs. And we're off and running. Let's pull up some questions that we've gone over. So this was from Katie. Oh, let's see here. Oops, sorry, did that out of order. You're fired, Lance. Addressing Megan, I came across one of your live videos with Lance when you were talking about insurance specializing in making sure they take care of their clients in sticky situations. Let's see. I remember you stating that sometimes you have to sue insurance companies, and this is the question here. Are you recommending having regular attorneys and a specialized attorney for insurance practices if any sub or GC contractor find themselves in a sticky situation?
So Katie, I don't know, do you want me to just go ahead and answer based on that, or is there more context you want to give me before I answer?
No, I just want, because I've seen parts of that video clip before, so I just kind of wanted you to go over that input because I wasn't able to watch that all the way to the end. And it sounds like that's something you really specialize in. So I'm sure everybody would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is something that I love talking about. I'm pretty passionate about suing insurance companies. Only when necessary. Only when necessary.
Lance is
so
laughing.
I know. He's like, oh man.
I'm like hiding
It makes
behind
it
the
feel
hat
more
over here.
comfortable, right?
I know. He's gonna disconnect the live right. Like, come on, Megan, we're like less than 5 minutes in. No, really. Truly, I only like to do it when it's necessary. Unfortunately, in my experience representing a lot of construction companies, more and more of the big CGL carriers are okay, I'm sure you guys have seen in your own businesses a rise over the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years, definitely the last 10 years, a rise in litigation arising out of alleged defects on the projects that you're doing. Even with restoration, I would imagine that comes up somewhat, Gloria, maybe not as often as with new construction.
Oh, it does. We've got roofs that have warranties and such. So absolutely dealing with that right now.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I will say we get called in when things go wrong. That's our specialty. We do the jobs that no one else wants to do. And so I constantly see that battle between owner and GC, like who's responsible for this, who's going to pay for this should be within warranty, so we run into that all the
100%.
time. But we're there as the mediator or the middleman who's there to just make it right, but the litigation is taking place on the different parties. So
yeah, usually it's another roofer that did a job incorrectly. We get called to do an inspection, provide a report that's opposite the insurance company's report. Somebody like Megan might bring in and hire us, and say, hey, I need a report from this XYZ expert for X, Y, and Z litigation. And it unfortunately sometimes does go to litigation, that's why this is such a good question.
Yeah. So as we see the sort of rise in claims, we also see the carriers reacting to, their businesses too. I'm not making excuses. Believe me, I'm never going to defend insurance carriers, but they're a business and they're in the business of making money too. And so they're trying to find more and more reasons and ways to deny claims, even claims that should be covered. You as the insured are paying your premiums. You're doing everything that you're supposed to do. You're following the terms of your policy in terms of giving them claim notifications. You're doing everything right. And they're manufacturing reasons, some of them sometimes, are manufacturing reasons to deny claims, especially when the claims are large, when there's a potential for a big payout. And in those situations, when that happens, sometimes the only way to get these big carriers to fulfill their contractual obligations to you, the insureds, is to sue them or threaten to sue them. Fortunately, the mere threat sometimes does work. I don't have to sue them all that often, but I do have to threaten it a lot more than I should have to threaten it when, again, the claims are very clearly covered and the insureds, you guys, the policyholders, are doing everything you're supposed to do. You've been paying them this money all this time over your policy term, over the years. Now you actually have a claim that you need them to step up and do the thing that you've been paying them to do. And now they're trying to find reasons not to do it. And so, in that case, it does sometimes help to threaten to file a lawsuit or even actually do it. To the second part of your question, Katie, I think I have to say, I can't say I specialize in California. Our attorney rules don't let us use that word. So I just have to give a disclaimer. I don't specialize. I can't use that word. But it is something that I do a lot. And insurance coverage is its own practice area. It is its own sort of body of law. Not all coverage issues arise out of construction litigation. My personal experience with construction issues does. And so to your point about needing a specialized attorney, you certainly should have somebody who's familiar with both construction law and with insurance coverage issues if you're going to have somebody make that threat, because there is a whole body of case law, at least in California, and I'm sure this is true in all the states, especially because the carriers are nationwide, right? There is a whole body of case law that interprets policy language specifically, how it is applied, and the obligations that carriers have to their insureds, and it can be nuanced. And so you do want an attorney who is familiar with those areas of law. So when they're even sending the initial demand letter, the threat to sue, they're coming at it full-throated so that the insurance company doesn't just sort of roll their eyes and say, okay, another threat from an attorney who doesn't know what they're talking about to sue me. Sure, I'm really worried about it, right? Like, it needs to be full-throated out of the gate of like, these are the arguments I'm going to make. This is my track record of having won this argument. My favorite example of this was I actually sued a carrier, and the case that I relied on in telling them that they were wrong was a case in which they were the defendant and they had already lost on the exact same issue.
Oh.
And I was like, yeah, I was like, you guys already tried this. You already lost. You appealed that loss. It went up to the appellate court, and the appellate court upheld your law. Like, you didn't learn your lesson. What are you doing? So it's examples like that of why it can be important to have somebody who is at least familiar with the nuanced area of law with construction law and with insurance coverage issues.
Thank you. I will say though, in our industry, our rule of thumb is, if that's not your strength, it's not your time to learn it. That's when you bring in a specialist or you sub somebody in, unless you can really identify and control that risk and feel confident when you're doing it. That's when you bring your specialist on or you hire someone. So, firm believer in that. But I mean, it was good to hear that outside perspective from you, because there are different attorneys with different specializations. I know you can't say that word, but it's just good to hear that perspective, I guess you can say. I haven't heard that, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. And before we move on to the next question, I'm going to acknowledge a couple, and maybe we have an episode 2 at some point, Megan. Let's see what happens here. So we have G. Chandler Harrison. Oh, the heck did I just press? Sorry about that. Best way to protect yourself as a second-tier sub, on federal projects. So, G, I would say reach out to Megan, but and we'll probably follow up with this on another episode down the road. I'm having a hard time this morning. In the realm of contractor risk management, my mind immediately goes to the language barrier as more immigrants are entering the construction industry. Are you seeing more of awareness to address safety issues as they relate to the language barrier?
I brought this up too.
Yeah.
I asked a safety question that relates to that, actually, Lance.
That is true.
About rolling out safety practices as a small business owner, because there's a fine line, right, between us telling people what to do and there are employees and we can, and then there's the whole sub-trade 1099 contractor. And there are some states that, depending on how you treat people, they may turn around and say, hey, you know what, this is not a 1099. This is actually an employee and you owe them, and blah, 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 and whatever. So rolling out safety I'm really curious about that. And of course, there's a language barrier. We're in New York, though. There's been a language barrier. I mean, multiple languages, lots of languages. So, it's not just one or the other. We're a very international city, much like California is a very international state as well.
It's so interesting how the word risk can take you down so many different rabbit holes.
Yeah,
it does. There's so many, from financial and economical, operations, political. I mean, the list goes on.
I didn't note whose question this was, but I'm struggling to read this morning. So if this is your question, please go ahead and read it out loud.
I believe that's mine. I was talking about how there's certain areas that we're seeing more as our operations, increase in different regions where they're not wanting to write policies, or they're almost making it unreasonable to perform work there because of the risks that are associated with it, whether it's environmental, whether it's different demographics. And I'm just wondering, like, moving forward as a contractor, like, how we're going to continue to address this, because if you have a decline where insurance companies are pulling out, not wanting to write, making it the cost unreasonably high, isn't that going to impact like the tourism and the economics of those areas? And I'm just wondering what we could do to be proactive about that, or if Megan knows any good information regarding that, because I'm starting to see this trend now in specific areas. And are you guys aware of this as well? I'm sure I'm not the only one hearing this from insurance agents. Yeah.
You're not. We actually lost our insurance carrier last year, and it was not because we had any lost runs or anything. It was just because they pulled out of New York State.
Yep. I've been having the same issue with trying to get different coverage written for that area and other areas as well. So it's interesting, because when that happens, that impacts all kinds of economics, So yeah, I find it concerning. So what would you think, Megan, being, an attorney, how can this be addressed, proactively?
Yeah, so it's I definitely resonate with this, because I live in Northern California, and we've been making national news for farmers pulling out and others on a homeowner's insurance side because of our extreme wildfire risk, right? And I happen to live up in the Sierras, and so every year at renewal, I'm like crossing my fingers, like, is this the year, right? So this issue is near and dear to my heart as it pertains to construction companies and commercial policies. Fortunately, knock on wood, I haven't experienced this directly on behalf of my clients yet. Again, knock on wood. But I do have some thoughts, because I think that overall, in terms of how commercial general liability policies are evolving in their claims handling, like what we just talked about before, in terms of increasing and denying claims, increasing premiums, higher deductibles, it really harkens back to the mid-aughts, right? In like the 2002 to 2008 timeframe, when so many CGL carriers went away from deductibles and implemented SIRs, self-insured retentions, that were huge, right? And just a quick explanation, if anybody doesn't know what that shift was. When you get your insurance policy, typically you have a deductible, which means you make a claim, and at the end of the claim, you pay whatever the amount of your deductible is. And it's usually pretty reasonable for CGL policies. It can range between $2,500 and $25,000, depending on your trade and your scope. Whereas with an SIR, self-insured retention, that's an amount of money, and the number is usually much higher. It usually starts at about $25,000, and I've seen them go all the way up to $100,000, again, depending on trade and scope of work. And that is an amount of money that you are obligated to pay out of pocket on the front end before your insurance carrier ever even has an obligation to step in and defend you. So that means you have to hire somebody like me out of pocket, pay me the full amount of your SIR, your $75,000. And if I haven't been able to get you out of the case by that point, by the time you spent $75,000 out of pocket, then your insurance carrier will come in, fire me, take over the case that I've now been litigating, right? They're now stepping in the middle of the case and trying to resolve it. But now they'll cover the rest of the legal fees and any settlement or ultimate judgment if it goes to trial. So what's going on now is really similar to what happened back then. And it didn't last very long. And I think it probably didn't last very long because there was so much pushback from the market. And in terms of what we're seeing now, I think a proactive, I haven't spent too much time looking into it yet myself, but I've been spending a lot of time thinking about it. I was just in Nashville last week. My husband is a mechanical superintendent, and he went to a risk management conference that was put on by his insurance captive, and I got to go along. And so I've been spending a lot of time over the last week, especially. It's why I really like this question, Katie, giving this a lot of thought. And I really think that captives might be a path forward from a proactive risk management strategy. And again, just by way of quick explanation, if you don't know what a captive is, It's where you're basically privatizing the insurance yourself, but you're doing it with a group of similarly situated contractors. I don't necessarily mean same trade. I don't even necessarily mean same state. It's just people who are opting into the captive, and it's basically a giant self-funded pot of money that members of the captive can draw upon when they have claims. The way the captive is able to manage that risk, the risk to the captive and the members of the captive, is they track you, they score you based on your number of claims and how expensive they are, and you can actually get kicked out of the captive, right? If you have too many claims that are too expensive, you can get kicked out of the captive. But by privatizing it, you are in more control than you are at the mercy of the general market on a construction general liability or a commercial general liability policy. And so my thoughts on it aren't fully formed yet because I'm just sort of starting to dig into this, but I'm really interested in uncovering more about this, Katie, and I'm happy to circle back with you as I dig in a little bit more. But I was really intrigued by what I heard at the conference last week. I've made some LinkedIn connections with some people who are involved in captives on the sort of broker side. And I think that it could be a way to manage risk. I see Josh is saying that they're extremely expensive. I'm not necessarily surprised to hear that, but at the same time, they might be expensive. But on the other hand, if you're paying for CGL coverage that you're not getting anyway, or you're having to hire somebody like me and pay me to get them to give you coverage, then it's kind of a cost benefit analysis, right? It's like, okay, 6 of one, half a dozen of another. But again, my thoughts on it aren't fully baked yet, but that's definitely, I was glad to see this question because I think captives might be, or something captive like might be a path forward for somebody who wants to be a little bit more in control on from a proactive approach.
Okay, I see he's talking about an OSEP and a CCIP as well. Who's that? Josh?
That's well, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I've been on some OSEPs and those before as well.
Yeah, so I am very anti OSIP, CSIP, RAP, whatever name you want to give it. They're all the same thing. OSIP is owner controlled insurance policy. CSIP is contractor controlled insurance policy. RAP is the same thing. I don't know why they've given it so many different names. It's all the same thing. I tend to not be a huge fan of those because that's like, if you're on a spectrum of the amount of control that you as the insured have, captive is like most control. OSIP is the least amount of control. You have no power to negotiate. You are required to accept it if you want to take the job, right? It's always a contractual term that I see anyway. Yep. Hashtag not legal advice. You're always required to take it. The amount that you pay for it is contractually stipulated, and you usually don't have room to negotiate that. They're in control completely of the defense. This gets into a little bit of issues with the tripartite relationship, which might be a term some of you are familiar with. I could talk about it in hours, but for purposes of this conversation, I'll just simply say the tripartite relationship is a legal fiction that has been created to justify the fact that attorneys who are appointed by insurance carriers we're serving two masters, which we're not typically supposed to do. We're usually in a position where we're conflicted out. We can't serve two people whose interests are adverse to each other. But that's exactly what happens with insurance, right? So the carrier, I don't do any insurance defense, but just for ease of reference, I'm going to use myself as the example, but I don't do this because I couldn't sue them if I did. So I'll never do it. But if I'm a panel attorney for an insurance carrier who appoints me to defend you, Katie, they're paying my bill. They're contractually controlling the defense. They get to make all the decisions, but you're my client. And so how am I supposed to reconcile that when you're saying to me, I want to fight this one. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't want to settle this one. And this happens to me all the time. But I've got a carrier with some person behind a computer that's got some algorithm that's, that they're a claims adjuster, and they're going like, well, statistically speaking, it's going to be more expensive for us to defend this one than to settle out. So we want you to settle it, Megan. And now what do I do? But for some reason in the law, we've decided like, it's fine. It's totally fine. Let's just let's pretend that's not a conflict. It's fine. So the tripartite relationship is another part of the problem. But with OSIPs and CSIPs, one attorney gets to control everything. They represent all the parties, and they're controlled and chosen by usually the GC. If you're the GC, you don't care about this. If you're a sub, it sucks because that attorney then can decide for strategic reasons based on how that particular case is going, that like, oh, it makes the most sense for us to just say this was all the concrete sub's fault, or this was all the grader, right? It started at the ground up, the grading was off, or the geotechnical report was wrong, and that caused all the rest of the problems. And so we're just going to blame all of it on one sub. And that attorney is representing that sub, but they're still saying that. And so that's why that's one of the many reasons why I don't like OSIPs, CSIPs, and RAPs. Yeah, you'll always be able to get coverage under them. And by that, what I mean is you'll always be able to enroll, but I've had a lot of them push back on actually covering claims too, which is infinitely more frustrating than when CGL carriers do it, because they at least have the insurance code in California anyway. There's like the insurance commission that I can appeal to if I absolutely have to. But with the OSIPs and CSIPs and RAPs, it's private too, for the most part. It's kind of hybrid. But they will like withhold policy documents. They'll be like, well, hey, sub, this project was 5 years ago, but I need your OSIP enrollment form. And if you can't provide me with your OSIP enrollment form for this project that happened 5 years ago, I don't know what to tell you. You got to prove you were enrolled. And I'm like, okay, but here's the contract documents that show that we did this job. We were contractually required to be a member and enrolled in the OSIP. I don't have the OSIP enrollment form, but I have everything else. And they're like, sorry, not going to cover you. And now that enrollee is like, okay, now I'm paying Megan out of pocket, even though I had to pay for this policy. So there's just, it's not necessarily a better approach is that's a very long-winded way of saying that. Sorry. I get really passionate about insurance issues when it comes to construction.
That's all good. We have quite an interesting dialogue going on in the comments. I think you have content for the next year, at least.
Are people arguing with me? I'm sure they are. I wasn't looking. I was ranting.
I know Katie had a hard stop coming up for an event. Gloria, how are you on time?
I'm good.
Okay.
And obviously, some of this stuff is stuff that we don't deal with. But as a construction manager, I will say, I do agree with Josh's comment that, at least blaming geotechnical is blaming a consultant in engineering, like you're not blaming, the sub. And to be fair, a lot of times as construction management, particularly for the older properties, if you don't start with the engineering and like the architecture and like really, really good professionals, like spending the money, then you know what? A lot of times they are the ones that are to blame because they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And so
yeah, Gloria, I want to clarify what I said, because you're 100% right. And what I said was definitely misleading. What I have experienced when I say blame the geotech, what I mean by that is, when you've got the subcontractual requirement for the foundation concrete guy, and he's got language in that contract that says, I'm accepting the geotechnical report as is. And so they're saying it's a geotechnical problem. But in California anyway, it's almost impossible to sue design professionals for defect claims. It's almost impossible. You can't get them in. So what they do is they blame the concrete sub, because they're like, well, you looked at the geotechnical report. And the concrete sub is like, okay, yeah, I mean, I looked at it, but I'm not an engineer, right? But they can't bring in the geotechnical engineer because it's almost impossible in California to sue a design professional. So that's what I meant by that. I just wanted to clarify. I agree with you completely. The professionals, the design professionals absolutely have some culpability. For some reason in California, though, we can never get them involved. They are like bulletproof out here. And it's endlessly frustrating because then the subs that directly touched their work are the ones that are left holding the bag. That's what I meant by that. But you're right. I totally agree with you and Josh.
All right.
It's,
Gloria,
it's 11 if you can hear my clock going off.
All right. I think this was Gloria's question. Why don't you go ahead and recap it for us?
Yeah. So it says, and it's kind of a question. It says insurance, self-performed work versus subcontracting everything. What's the best way to minimize risk, liability, and why? And the reason that I ask this is because we started our company as a construction management company, just to give you context. And then about almost 3 years ago now, we also started to self-perform some of the work from a quality assurance standpoint. I just could not find the right subcontractors in certain local markets to do the work the way that I wanted it to. So we did start to self-perform. However, as we shop for insurance, and we've talked a lot about insurance today, there are some benefits to hiring subcontractors with their own insurance, and then there's benefits to doing your own work. I know for government contracts, they want you to have, W-2 employees. They don't want you to subcontract everything. And so as we look to grow and maybe go into government contracting, I say maybe with air quotes because I don't know yet. It's something that we're definitely looking into. So, yeah.
Yeah. So this question is so multifaceted, and I love it because it covers so many different areas of risk. So when I'm working with one-on-one clients, the very first thing that we do is we start with a risk tolerance assessment, because that dictates every other strategy, because it's like a buffet, right? I mean, you can pick and choose which risk strategies you want to implement and which ones you don't. And your choices are going to be impacted by what you prioritize, how you assign value to the different areas of risk, right? So for you, based on this very limited conversation, you're saying I'm balancing two competing interests. One, quality control, which is clearly a risk management issue. And two, insurance and liability shifting, which is another risk issue. And so for you, you'd have to say, okay, these two things compete. It's like right? It's like this. You got to decide, right? And so depending on which one of those two things you value more, that will dictate how you approach this. What I will say, hashtag not legal advice, what I will say about that is, if you decide to prioritize shifting of liability, then it's always going to make more sense to subcontract out as much as possible, because as long as you've got good contracts, as long as you've got good indemnity, defense, flow through provisions, liquidated damages, delay claim, as long as you've got good contracts that are protecting you as the upstream contractor, and you're putting down all that liability onto the subs, then that's always going to be the more aggressive risk approach. That's going to be shifting most of the liability risk to your subs. If that's a priority, that's how you handle that. If though you say, okay, that's great, but I can't find a good concrete sub to save my life, or whatever, pick whichever trade it is that you're choosing to self-perform, right? Like
drywall.
Okay, can't find a good drywall sub to save our life. They can't do the work to the quality that we want to do it.
They really can't.
Then you just sort of rebalance that scale, and you say, okay, I'm going to have really great contracts with all my other subs. We're going to self-perform the drywall scope of work, and you just adjust accordingly. So I love this question because it's so multifaceted, and it gets into like what I love most about risk management strategy, the strategy part of it, which is like digging in deep, right, to your values and what you prioritize. But that's what's great about it, because you can customize and tailor it. And so I don't have a great answer, because there's no one right answer. It really is a customized strategic decision, and that's what's so exciting about it.
Yeah,
So
it's like project specific a little bit.
I feel like we touched base on this just a pinch in the beginning too, about identifying that risk, controlling it, and if it's not your strength or your expertise, then you're subbing or hiring it out. That's something that we always do in our practice. If we're not insured to do it, we're not doing it. You're bringing your specialist in and making sure that you have that hold harmless language, the identify the right CGs, with the right additional blankets for insured, along with that COI. All those things are essential. And so just making sure that everything, is apples to apples and oranges to oranges, when you're bringing those people on for a contract to perform work for you. So I just always tell people those are, like Megan was saying, that is what you need to make sure you're reviewing, especially when you're bringing someone on as like a tiered sub, if you're a sub hiring out more additional work. So, but I do feel bad, you guys. I got to go. More buses lined up. I left them for a good over a half an hour. I only got 2 volunteers there, and there's like 500 to 600 students coming. So I do have to go. I apologize. And what happened to that gentleman? I don't see him here. Wasn't there supposed to be another guy?
Right now, so he did message me just before we started.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
He sent us a group message saying he got stuck on site, and it's just one of those days.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, it was really nice talking with you, lovely ladies, and Lance. I look forward to meeting and Zooming with you all again, and thank you for having me on this call. And thank you, Megan, for all the insightful info. Same as well, Gloria.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
All right, so now it's just the three of us. It's I was just thinking, it feels like I walked in on the wrong class, and I sat down anyway, right in the front. So now I can't get up. I'm learning so much, but I'm like, wow, this is the depth of knowledge. It's crazy. And again, to everybody that's asking questions and adding comments, I think there's going to be an episode 2. But in the meantime, reach out to Megan directly, because you have access to her. Take full advantage. You know, whether it's through her strategy sessions, not coaching, or her course. So we do have one more question from Gloria here before we take off, or a statement question.
Yeah,
Or
no,
was there
this
more?
is, yeah, coming from the field here. This is straight from the iPhone
Yeah, you
notes.
got it.
So there are some contractors and subtrades, as you know, that like to pull contracts from Google
Yep.
and copy paste
Yeah.
whatever clauses they like and etc.
You're making me
And
uncomfortable, Gloria, but I know what you're talking about, but I hate it.
you know
I hate
what
it.
I'm talking. I gotta like lay up the question.
Yeah, I know.
And then there are those who are like on a 25-page AIA contract that's been modified by their lawyer and blah blah blah, and it's fully redlined, etc. And then there's the in between. You got a custom contract that's maybe a customized AIA, or it's got the general conditions of the AIA, but then it's like its own blah blah blah. So when it comes to contracts, what is the best approach? And we know this is not legal advice, okay? But what is the best approach for small boutique companies? Because this is typically the ones that I'm seeing as a construction manager, okay? Piecemealing contracts that they found on the internet, and California law, very different than New York law, even though there's some overlap. And so a contract that works in California language may be completely irrelevant, although it sounds really sexy in New York.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the rise of AI, this is like so like literally people are asking ChatGPT to write their contract, and I'm just like, oh boy, I can't wait for the litigation around these contracts in 10 years. I'm like, I'm ready to watch that happen. I'm gonna have my popcorn, right? Like it's gonna be so bad.
Yeah, I'm gonna be sitting right next to you.
Right? I know. We'll just be like, man, can you believe they did that? No, man, I can't believe they did that. So AIA contracts have been vetted, right? So they're I don't hate AIA contracts. AIA contracts actually tend to be pretty even in terms of allocation of risk. Things are usually pretty reciprocal in an AIA contract. There's not this like sort of let's just push everything down to the subs, which is kind of nice if you're a sub, right? It's like it's usually reciprocal. So I don't hate AIA contracts. In terms of risk management, though, especially for smaller, believe it or not, smaller construction companies, it's almost more important. And the reason I say that is because, unfortunately, for some reason that I have not really been able to pinpoint yet, in my experience, the smaller companies get sued more than the bigger ones. I've got some theories about why, but I'm not really. I don't want to share them because I'm not sure. But they do get sued more. And again, in my experience. And so it's even more important for them. In California, and I know you're in New York, but I think my understanding, albeit very high level understanding, is that California and New York laws are actually pretty similar.
They are actually.
Yeah, right, that's what I thought. So I think California tends to still be a little bit more pro-employee, pro-subcontract. It's like a little bit more downstream, pro-downstream than New York, a little bit. So in California, it's really, really, really important that you understand the specific contractual requirements, legal requirements based on what type of contract it is. So if you're doing residential construction in California or residential renovations, especially, there are very, very, very specific language that has to be included in your contract, or you're risking a licensing board issue. And so I think best practice, even if it's pushing the budget a little bit, you should be able to find a good construction attorney that will draft a custom contract for you for a flat rate, or at least even if they're doing it hourly, it's a limited scope engagement. That's what we call that, a limited scope engagement, where we're basically you're just hiring us to do this one thing. And that way you're making sure that they are including all of the state specific, trade specific, scope of work specific language that absolutely has to be in there. And you can just periodically have them check it over every couple of years. It doesn't need to be an annual thing. The laws don't change that frequently, at least not out here. At least not to that stuff. But every 2 or 3 years, just have a quick email to them and say like, hey, you wrote this contract for me a couple of years ago. Just checking in to see if there are any major changes to the law that we should be aware of. If we need to do some revisions and some updates. And I think that you should be able to, even small companies should be able to get that done. I would hate to give prices for other attorneys out of state, but it shouldn't break the bank. It should.
Well, I can give pricing. I mean, that's fine. I can let people know, typically what we have found is, you're looking at a couple $1,000s, around $4,000 to $5,000 to have, these contracts drafted up. And for us, this was about roughly 2 years ago. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, I've just had to renew my license and go through the licensing board again for renewals. So now would also be a good time to have same attorney or a different attorney, maybe, review those things. And the reason that I'm asking is just because on larger projects, we are seeing a want or a requirement for AIA, and that seems to scare a lot of the subcontractors.
Really?
That's as if it's not going to protect them, it's going to protect a developer or a prime contractor. And then in the case of prime contractors, which are national, and we don't have to name drop here because they don't need any more attention than they already get.
And we all know who they are anyway.
And we all know who they are anyway. They have their own contracts, which obviously are very heavy, and they
won't redline or negotiate them at all. Usually they're just like, take it or leave it. We don't care.
We don't work with them. We go after the exact same contracts that they go after. And I just tell the developer, look, I am the MWBE. Like, you don't even have to sit here and shop, for MWBEs with this prime contractor that you don't like anyway, but donated a lot of money into some political party. And that's why they got the contract.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And Lance, I have to drop whatever at least once in these things. But it is what it is. It is what it is. So, and I see Josh says $4,000 to $5,000. It seems pretty reasonable, for these contracts. At least that's what I'm seeing in the state of New York. And I shopped around for attorneys. I called about 4 to 5 of them, and that just seemed to be the roundabout number. And there was one that gave me a price for $2,000, and I didn't hire him just based off of the fact that his price was too low.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the most important thing when you're attorney shopping, and you should attorney shop, by the way, I totally advocate for attorney shopping. The most important thing is that you have somebody who actually has experience with drafting construction contracts. And that is very niche, right? So not all construction attorneys do that. I only recently started doing these for my clients within the last few years, despite the fact that I've been litigating construction for 15, right? I was purely litigation for many, many years. That didn't mean that I was qualified to write a contract. I didn't start doing that until I felt like I'd litigated so many of them that I had a better understanding, right? So just because somebody's a construction attorney doesn't mean that they're qualified to write a contract. Similarly, what we often call a transactional attorney. Those are attorneys who just write things. They write contracts, they write wills, they write trusts, they just write things. They're not necessarily qualified if they don't have any construction experience. So you want to be really specific in the questions that you're asking when you're meeting with these attorneys. You want to be cautious about the communication style. And even though it's a limited scope engagement where they're just doing this sort of one thing for you, you do want to have a comfortable relationship with them. You shouldn't feel like you're putting them out by asking follow-up questions or asking them to explain things to you and teach you things, because that's a big thing that we as attorneys should be doing for our clients. I do this with my clients all the time so that they don't need me to review every contract anymore. I'm not trying to milk them for every penny that they have. I want to teach them as we go. These are standard provisions. These are standard languages. These are standard red lines. You don't need me to do all of this for you every single time. You're a fully capable, smart, competent person who runs a business. Let me just give you the tools you need, and then you can do it yourself. So you want to have that kind of relationship with the attorney that you choose so that you can learn from them as well, so that you're not completely dependent on them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, as a consultant, not, a specialist or advice giver, in the construction industry, you know, and especially for construction management outside of the state of New York, because we
Yeah.
do work outside of the state of New York. You know, we do rely very heavily on local experts. And yeah, once they teach us what we need to learn, we take that, we, you know, implement it, and then we can manage it ourselves in house. And then if we need to bring them in for inspections or what have you, then we do that. And same thing with software and everything else, you know, because I'm a huge proponent for utilizing software, but you've got to manage the software can't manage you.
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
There was one thing you forgot, Megan, when you said you have to price shop attorneys. You forgot to say hashtag not financial advice.
Oh no, I can't use that hashtag. That's Goose's hashtag. That's on his
Oh,
copy.
no.
So I can't say hashtag not financial advice. I only have hashtag not legal advice. Shout out.
Well, the
Alright, well, you know-
hashtag, it is hashtag legal advice because, I mean, technically we weren't really talking about like how much money you spend on an attorney. It's like make sure that you shop multiple attorneys, just like you shop
Yep.
multiple contractors
Yep.
and, you know, multiple demo people, etc. You know.
Hashtag good business advice. How about
Yeah,
that?
hashtag good business advice. Yeah, exactly. For everything. I mean, most of us are grocery shopping at like 4 different grocery stores right now.
Yes.
Like, I mean,
Yes. I feel it in my soul.
Felt that in your soul.
I do it. Yeah. I'm like, oh, we just did that yesterday. We just had to go to like 3 different places. Oh, yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for your time. And, you know, Megan, I really do encourage you to go back to those comments because there is some
Yeah.
gold for you. I encourage everybody to reach out, connect with both Gloria, Katie, and Megan, and engage Megan if you have your own set of questions or if you have concerns, right? The thing is, once you turn on that light and you start to see this risk, you can't unsee it. And the
Yep.
worst thing to do is just stand there like a dumbass and just go, oh no, hope this doesn't happen to me. Like hit her
Or
up.
wait worse until something happens and then you're SOL. And just to add to that, like we had an attorney, like I didn't know very much about AIA contracts. We were working with a developer. I literally hit up an attorney buddy of mine and he was like, listen, just pay us for 2 hours of our time. We'll review the contract and just make sure that, you know, let's be proactive about this instead of you calling me at the very end because, you know, you're going to get sued or whatever. And then, you know what ended up happening? That developer ended up losing all his money and we ended up like not working on that project anyway. So thank God we paid for 2 hours of that attorney's time.
Yeah.
know?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So hashtag don't be cheap.
I love it. Tanya, hashtag don't be scared. Don't be scared, guys. I'm not trying to scare you. I hate that that's a takeaway. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to empower you. But you can't be empowered if you don't know what you don't know. And so I'm just trying to, like, to use Lance's analogy, I'm trying to shine a spotlight on the things that you might not know because you don't need to be scared. You just need to be in charge. So once you know what you don't know, then you can develop a strategy to be proactive, to be prepared. And then you don't have to be scared. It's much more scary to not know, right? It's like, think about 100%. Little kids. We're afraid of the dark because we don't know what's out there. That's what's scary about the dark is we don't know what we can't see. So don't be in the dark, be empowered, use your tools, create your strategies. Oh, good. Okay. I'm glad you're sharing. I was like, no, don't be scared. I'm trying to scare anybody. I hate that. No, don't be scared.
In my 20s, I kept getting mail from the IRS and I would throw it away because I was so scared.
Oh,
and then I finally opened it one day and it said I owed $20 in back taxes. Oh, man.
I love it.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who doesn't open mail because I'm scared. Thanks.
Yeah. I heard that's a sign of executive dysfunction. I think we all have a little bit of executive dysfunction going on because I do the same thing.
Okay.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for taking the time to join us. We'll see you for part 2